gentlemen, we will now begin our second general session. Please welcome AACP President-elect Cynthia Boyle, Chair of the Department of Pharmacy Practice and Administration at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
Good morning. Oh, thank you. Good morning, friends and colleagues. I hope that everyone enjoyed the beginning of this year's annual meeting, including Jane McGonigal's energetic presentation about the application of game design to health, as well as last night's exhibitors' opening reception. There's so many opportunities here to continue our learning and networking, including this session. Since 2004, AACP has dedicated this symposium to a wide range of topics of scientific importance to our profession, including last year's focus on big data and how technology will affect every aspect of our work. This year's symposium focuses on the important roles of patient and patient advocacy groups that they play in healthcare. Today's patient is retooled and ready for a different kind of interface with research and clinicians. As we introduce our outstanding moderator and our panel of speakers, we have two wonderful scientific awards to present. AACP President Pat Chase will do the honors, and I'll now turn the podium over to her.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's a true pleasure to celebrate our latest Volwiler and Dawson Award winners. I'll begin with the Volwiler Research Achievement Award. This award was established in 1977 to recognize outstanding research by a pharmaceutical scientist and educator, and is named in honor of the late Ernest H. Volwiler, former president and research director at Abbott Laboratories. Today, we honor K.H. Lee, the Keenan Distinguished Professor of Medicinal Chemistry at the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. Dr. Lee has been a member of the UNC faculty for many decades and has been director of the school's Natural Products Research Lab since 1983. In his 45-year career at the school, Dr. Lee has written more than 823 research articles, been issued more than 110 patents, and has been invited to deliver more than 400 lectures and presentations. Dr. Lee was appointed as chair, professor, and honorary director of the Chinese Medicine Research and Development Center at the China Medical University and Hospital in Taiwan in 2010. He also became chair and professor at the College of Pharmacy at Kaohsiung Medical University in Taiwan in 2011. His research labs combine the fields of natural products and synthetic medicinal chemistry research to discover and develop natural products as clinical trial drug candidates. The lab has discovered several thousand bioactive natural products that have been used to develop pharmaceutical agents, such as the antiviral HIV drug that was derived from a Chinese herb. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Matt, for the excellent introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to thank Lucinda as well as Melinda for notifying me to be the recipient of this distinguished award. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I am deeply honored to be selected as the recipient of the 2015 Volwiler Research Achievement Award from the AACP. And Special thanks are also due to the review committee members who reviewed my applications and were in favor of my research accomplishments. My research has been with bioactive natural products, and then by combining the arts of modern medicinal chemistry, natural products chemistry, as well as the cutting-edge life science technology to discover and develop clinical trial candidates for treating cancer and AIDS. During the past 45 years at UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy, and then this started when I was appointed as assistant professor July 1, 1970. I also like to say something concerning my research career. I have served as a director of the Natural Product Research Laboratories for Eshelman School of Pharmacy. And then since then, I started to build up a global collaborative research programs with more than 60 laboratories worldwide, targeting the new drug discovery. And then, so with the constant grant support from NIH, continuously for the past 45 years, we have been able to discover several thousands bioactive natural products, their active principle, derivatives, as well as synthetic analogs or derivatives. And then this are quite useful and will serve as a new leads for future drug design for the treatment of cancer, AIDS, as well as other diseases. And then this was also evidenced by producing more than 830 research articles and 110 patents. And then special thanks due to many excellent collaborators. And then I'd like to say I have been privileged to educate more than 230 scientists who work in my laboratories. And then most of them have already become very active researchers worldwide. It's been a joy to be engaged in this very exciting and rewarding field of research, as every day we have a chance to discover something new. This not only is going to follow the path and also have the chance to discover something new, and then that will uncover the secrets of the natures, but also has the opportunity to create a drug to benefit mankind's health for tomorrow. And then finally, I'd like to say thank you to many of my former mentors, collaborators, and friends. And then without their constant encouragement, advice, as well as diligent contribution, nothing could have been accomplished. In addition, I also like to thank to Dean Robert Bruin, the Dean of the UNC Eshelman School of Pharmacy. He and many of the faculty members, staff, they gave me a very strong support. It's been truly a very ideal environment at UNC Pharmacy School for doing research and teaching. I'm also extremely proud to play a part in AACP's mission to improve pharmacy education's research, scholarship, and practice and the service, and then to try to promote the societal health. Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful honor. Wow, what a career. Our second award this morning is the Paul R. Dawson Award. This award is endowed by Amgen in honor of its former Vice President of Marketing and Sales, a staunch supporter of education and biotechnology. In 2015, the award criteria was expanded to include all research that has made sustained contributions to changes in the quality of patient outcomes. This year, we recognize Dr. Marie Chisholm Burns, Professor of Pharmaceutical Sciences and the Dean of the University of Tennessee College of Pharmacy. Dr. Chisholm Burns is nationally and internationally known for her work in improving healthcare delivery systems and patient outcomes. A clinical pharmacy services intervention published in Clinical Transplantation demonstrated the benefits of pharmacist-delivered care for renal transplant patients, a population particularly prone to medication non-adherence and high medical costs. Dr. Chisholm Burns created the Medication Access Program, or MAP, which strives to increase access to medications for solid organ transplant patients. MAP facilitates patients' access to medications through various means, such as enrollment in Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, foundations, and pharmaceutical companies' assistance programs. As a result of her efforts, she has attracted approximately $10 million in research support as a principal investigator from state sources, industry, foundations, and the National Institutes of Health. She was awarded the Daniel B. Smith Practice Excellence Award from the American Pharmacists Association, among her many other accolades. Please join me in congratulating Dr. Chisholm Burns.
Good morning, and thank you, Pat. I'm truly honored and humbled to receive the 2015 Paul Dawson Award, and I want to sincerely thank AACP and the selection committee for this recognition. For those of us who do science, we know that we stand on the shoulders of many exceptional individuals who have helped us along the way. I want to thank my husband and son, John Fitzgerald Burns and John Fitzgerald Burns Jr. They're here today, and I want to thank them for their extreme and unequivocal love and support. They keep me grounded. I'm fortunate to have them in my lives. And a very special thanks need to go out to the University of Georgia, for that's the school that provided me a wonderful education, so I have to recognize them as well. And a very, very, very tremendous shout out goes to the University of Tennessee College of Pharmacy for the faculty, staff, and the students have been a wonderful support and encouragement for me and inspiration over the years. Additionally, I want to thank Drs. Barbara Wells, Joe DePiro, Stuart Feldman, and Christina Spivey for nominating me for this award and for their support and friendship over the years as well. AACP this year allowed a very special group of individuals to come into my life, and this is my ALFP mentee group. And many of them are here today, so I want to thank you for being here and all the joy that you have brought me this year, and I know we'll have this joy for years to come. Now, those of you who know me, you know that I'm committed to science. I love science. I've always loved the discovery of things and to disseminate that knowledge. I love the pharmacy profession, I love education, and I'm committed to these things and to improving healthcare for all. I know almost everyone here is also committed to these causes as well, and it's with you that I share this award with. This journey for me has been one of great importance, commitment, and fulfillment. Today, we as a profession and as a society are confronted with many, many challenges. But I want to remind you, with these challenges come opportunities. Today's civil rights issues, I believe, surround health disparities, cost and financing of healthcare, access, and educational inequalities. Someone once told me that life is like a camera. Focus on what is important, capture the good times, develop from the negatives, and if it doesn't work out, take another shot. AACP, thank you for your support. You are part of my family. Many of you today came up to see my son. Some of you haven't seen my son since he was 1. He comes to this meeting along with my husband. Probably out of the last 11 years of his life, at least 10 of these years, they have been here. So again, thank you for allowing me to focus on the important issues. Thank you for this tremendous recognition. Thank you for all of your encouragement over the years and allowing me to do something that I love to do, the science, the teaching, and the service. So thank you very much.
Well, a wonderful hearty congratulations to Dr. Lee and Dr. Chisholm Burns. Now for our keynote presentation. I'm pleased to introduce Debra Lappin, moderator of today's session and principal at Faegre BD Consulting. She will lead a discussion on how researchers and clinicians alike comprehend and embrace the significance of patient and public participation in the full range of research efforts from hypothesis to health. Please welcome Dr. Lappin and the panel.
Thank you. As you can see, I'm going to have our panelists come up with me so that when I'm through speaking, we can move seamlessly. I think my mic could be turned down a bit. Seamlessly into our discussion. Congratulations, Dr. Lee and Dr. Chisholm Burns. Really extraordinary careers and inspiration to our panel. And Dr. Boyle and Dr. Main, thank you for thinking about this subject on this morning. Any time of disruptive change is unsettling, and so how do you see around the corner? How do you see the new tools, resources, methodologies that truly I and my fellow panels believe will distinguish your work in the future? The patient and patient organization of today is retooled, recalibrated, refocused on bringing extraordinary new assets into the research enterprise. As I said, as we move from merely aggregating data to pulling information out of data to looking at new knowledge that comes from that, the patient, the devices that they wear, the way that their data communicates with you all in your labs and in your clinics is part of this new age. We see these evolving megatrends around us, and patient centricity, I would suggest, is at the center of all of them. Globalization, new complex systems as we look at, big data, value-based medicine. All of these, and there are others, look at the patient in a very new and different role. So how do we name this science? How do we name this new partnership? It's confusing, dizzying at times to think of all of the words that are defining the new role of the patients. Patient-centered, patient-focused, patient-driven, patient-powered, patient engagement, patient involvement. I could go on, patient preference, but others on the panel today will join with me in saying we miss something if we stay focused only on the concept of patient, because none of us can shed the traditional fact of that being a limiting definition. And you need to move toward this person becoming a real active participant, a new partner, And partnerships are based on having assets that are of equal value on each side. And as we explore this today, I hope you leave thinking this is a partnership in a very new and different environment. So catch yourself as I catch myself, thinking that this is politically correct. It's really part of a transformation that's taking place around us, a course correction with new, powerful collaborations. And so that's my social theory of the PC of patient centricity. So what we're going to do this morning, I'm going to take you on a little bit of a journey about where we've been, and it's one person's perception of this, and I'm going to ask my panelists to fill in the blanks. But as I do so, please fill in your own thinking about how did we get to the place where we are today. I'm going to look at where we are today, and then I'm going to ask our panel to say, where are we going? What does it mean for you all? As of Friday, we're in a very interesting place. We passed something called the 21st Century Cures Bill, and it looks at patient centricity in a very big way. Recent articles written around this, one said if patient engagement were a drug, it would be a blockbuster and it would be malpractice not to be thinking and using it. We know that it's about a new science, and it's about how do we look at what this patient engagement brings to the drug research and development process? How is it going to directly impact trial designs, new clinical endpoints? What is clinically meaningful? What are we looking at in new benefit risk methodologies? And how do we, something that you live with every day, but without this patient engagement will fail every time, patient adherence and the costs of failure. So I think in the journey we're going to move, at least I'm going to suggest we move through the historical evolution from paternalism to the essential establishment of autonomy for our patients and our public, to a final landing resting place where we are today of this new partnership that I will ask our panel to really explode wide open for us. So where did we begin? Well, of course, we began at a time of, and I'm only starting with the 50s, but thinking of the precursor of the Nuremberg Code, for the first time saying informed consent was required. An amazing thought. But only 8 years later, Henrietta Lacks, no one was thinking that anybody should ask her for any consent to give these magnificent cells, the HeLa cells that have changed science for decades. As somebody who lectured on biomedical ethics at the University of Colorado for years, I know we can't hold the researchers at Hopkins responsible for that because culturally, we weren't ready. We just didn't think and see that patient and understand what power there would be in her genetic code into the future. And it's still hard to grasp what it meant for her family that she lives on in the way that she does. We were in a time of paternalism, of trust, of naivete, of a happy naivete. I mean, my mother never thought about whether the doctor was right or wrong. The March of Dimes became one of the first movements where society decided to take on changing drug development. Moving from the iron lung to a polio vaccine, all driven by public dollars, was a pretty novel change at that part of the century. And then as a society, we were changing. We were protesting, we were looking at our rights of privacy, and in 1972, we understood that something as horrible as Tuskegee had been going on for 40 years. It was a reflection on, again, our new values. We began to talk about patient centricity, and the AHA proposed, although it didn't pass for many years, a patient bill of rights in 1973. And we passed the Belmont report. So I'm going to give you 3 patient vignettes, and they all happen to be about me, but so you indulge me. But my first one is the deformed man in 1978. This is a picture I found in our medical law library after I had been told by my treating orthopedic surgeon that I had sciatica. Now, I couldn't walk. I couldn't get to my law firm. I was in such pain I had to hold on to the countertops to get to the phone. This was a major problem and a major event in my life. I happened to do research in the law library looking for sciatica and came upon spondylitis. And I read about ankylosing spondylitis. And I read that, and I told him the one problem I had was that eye inflammation in college before autoimmunity was even understood or known. So I called him that night and I said, "Do you think I have ankylosing spondylitis?" And I made a mistake. I said, "Have you ever heard of the disease?" And you know, we all know the orthopedic surgeon mindset. It is what it is. And his words were, "Stop trying to diagnose yourself. Women don't get that disease, and stick with practicing law." And I think, what a statement of the paternalism. And I just knew I didn't like him, but I bought into what he told me. Now, the next statement, the second vignette, is the next year after I had been diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis. Wonderful rheumatologist who became my partner in care and is the reason I'm not deformed today. There's nobody that you know that got ankylosing spondylitis and was as sick as I was in '78 that's still standing as straight as I am. And it's because of our partnership. So I protect him in saying that he asked a group of us, women, to come to grand rounds at Rose Hospital to make the point that women get this disease. And I walked into the hospital, and there on the wall was the poster for the grand rounds. Now, if you know ankylosing spondylitis, you have a B27 antigen that all but 5% of the people with this disease carry. So walking through Rose Hospital, here's the poster, and it says, "Come and see a bevy of B27 beauties." You know, again, he never even gave it a second thought of whether that would sort of take away the enthusiasm for participating in research. The next vignette is autonomy. So forward 1984, I'm in the hospital, and 18 days, and toward the end of the stay, when I finally could begin to think and come back, and I was so sick you can see the arch over my ankles in the bed so that the sheets couldn't touch my ankles because they were so inflamed, and my knees. And I asked to see my record. I wanted to read the journey that I had been through the last 15 days, and they told me in no uncertain terms I could not see my record, that it wasn't mine. And I said, well, that doesn't make sense because I signed a consent form to give it to my insurers. But this was the beginning of autonomy. Did I have the right to read the record? They finally said I did. But here we come into the 80s, the gay rights movement, fundamentally changing the role of patients with the FDA. Kate Lorig at Stanford, developing a self-help course for people with chronic disease, and learning that self-help, especially in arthritis, reduced patient visits by 16%, perceptions of pain by 45%, patient-reported outcomes being predictive of long-term survival and mortality and morbidity rates in arthritis. All evolving, women becoming inclusive in clinical trials. The whole notion of community-based participatory research began to emerge. It came out of Latin America, actually. And then we had in 1998 an interesting IOM report that said to the NIH, you need to involve the American public in how you set research priorities. And there was great pushback, but this was the beginning of the trade-off that Congress was going to make with the NIH to say, if we double your budget, if we give you money, and if we stay out of your business, you need to find new ways to engage with the public to create your research priorities. ClinicalTrials.gov emerges, PubMed. That is one of the greatest success stories about public engagement that exists. When it began in 1996, it was not free. It was something called Medline. When the NLM overnight changed it, very little advertising, and it became free. Year after year, the access to primary data changed, and .com usage rather than .edu overnight eclipsed to the millions and millions of uses today of our deep medical information generated by the NIH. And the wonderful Tom Del Banco, Nothing About Me Without Me, that became a statement that Carolyn Clancy at AHRQ referenced constantly, and it really became a defining sort of call. So now we're into the last decade. And I think, patient-reported outcomes became defined. The FDA issued guidance. They became validated. They became part of clinical trials. Patients Like Me was formed in 2004. Today has, I think, around 500,000 patients. They're engaged in reporting their own data. They've just entered into a collaboration with the FDA to look into patient safety as reported by the patient, as opposed to the Sentinel system that relied on the physician. Think how mind-bending that is. There's some concern that we'll see more, therefore, of serious adverse events and patients reporting, I'm doing beautifully. So we've got to make sure we get the benefit as well as the risk in new social network sites. The FDA develops its own patients. We have the army of women. Are people going to take control of becoming clinical trialists or enrolling in trials? One of my colleagues that you'll meet in a minute, Sharon Terry, becomes recognized in the Wall Street Journal as a citizen scientist, a term that had just been evolving, but I think still to this day, she's the only layperson to have discovered a gene and patented it. Crowdsourcing, prize technology, all of this begins to evolve at a pace that, again, is mind-numbing. Kaleido, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, brings a drug with collaboration with Vertex. They now still raise around $130 million from the hard scrabble work of walks and everything that you do to engage communities. But they have $150 million that they got on top of it for the royalty rights, a drug that never would have come to market. It's just been reapproved for a broader label. CDRH has patient preference, a new term, but looking at patient preferences in devices, and a new device was approved this year. It failed to meet its clinical endpoint for obesity, but because of the strong risk-benefit data that they relied on, that a device was approved. FDASIA, PDUFAs, for those in the policy realm, these are familiar words, but patient-focused drug development emerged. And Teresa Mullins, our panelist here today, will tell us what it means for the FDA, what it means for you. The Duchenne community took a bold step. They were not part of the patient-focused drug development group. They wrote their own guidance. 80 pages, 18 months of work, scientific communities converging. And the FDA, in many, many public statements, has said what a strong contribution this guidance has been to science. So we'll talk about that as well. And now we have 21st century cures, and we have the president launching a precision medicine initiative, all part of where we are today. And a postscript of that story, because I was able to go on a biologic in the late 1990s, I am able to work today and went back to a kind of productive life that it was just not even imaginable when I was that young woman in the hospital. So I'm going to go through the next part because I want to get to our panel, but we are at a time of great transformation with 21st century cures. Just a phenomenal piece of legislation that's just been passed. We have all of these assets coming in from the patient. Patient ownership of data, patient trust because they are owning the data and they can control the privacy issues. A new asset in negotiations. New registries, vibrant patient registries, and the immense contribution of social network sites. What's coming back to the patient will be new wearable devices, new wellness offers, new disease management tools. They're no longer anecdotal in their experience with the regulatory enterprise. Trial matching at a vibrant level, genetic access, understanding with counseling what your risks are without having it being held back from you. Development returns for our industry partners are immense. Sanofi has hired the first patient senior VP, Chief Patient Officer, Boyle, who came over from Pecori. first of the 10 large pharmaceutical companies to put that chief patient officer with the chief medical officer and the chief science officer, because they believe it is the entire life cycle, getting the patient input in the hypotheses that will be tested. Long-term trial designs, fast-track regulatory authority. The deal, you get approval earlier, there's going to be greater post-market surveillance. Social networking and adverse event reporting, co-ownership like cystic fibrosis, new trial results databases. And the benefits, well, there are many. We'll look at outcomes databases today. We're going to look at management tools. We're going to look at pricing and access. What does that mean? And again, post-market surveillance. So this is the new partnership, fundamentally changed. The quid pro quo, on one hand and on the other. I have data, I have access to patients, I have ability to recruit faster, I have the ability to get the data you need that is big data, is patient data. What will be the exchanges? You'll give me greater insights into your data that you're developing. I will negotiate with industry to be on the Data Safety Management Board. Really a new partnership and a new transaction is unfolding. So I want to just leave with, again, to reconfirm for each of us the extraordinary power that rests within each of us when we think of ourselves as patients. This is Renoir when he then had rheumatoid arthritis. His weight had dropped to 105 pounds. He had to have a wire over his bedding so that the bed covers did not touch his joints. He had his brushes taped to his hands so that his fingers didn't claw into the bottom of his fist. And then what did he do? He sat and painted with rolled up canvases where he could only paint a little inch at a time and produce these pieces of art in that extraordinarily challenged, disabled condition. And it tells us that how we define quality in our lives keeps us going. The power of what Renoir produced and said to a world then is the same power that I think we're unleashing today in a very different environment. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panel, and then we're going to look at more specific tools, methodologies, resources that are coming into your world. So the first person to my left is somebody that I think is known well to you. Well, actually, you're not the first person. Let's start at the far end. No, you're not known well to them. Let's come over here with Eleanor.
That would be a surprise to me.
Eleanor has such a distinguished career, and the reason I'm introducing my colleagues here is because if I leave it to them, I know they'll be way too modest and you won't really understand everything these people have done. So Eleanor was at Pfizer for many years before coming to the university, and she was senior director of federal relations at Pfizer. She worked at AHRQ. She's been an advisor to CMS and to the National Quality Forum. She has a background in pharmacy and a PhD in policy and epidemiology. She has been working extensively on regulatory science, patient-focused drug development, and just this last week, it's been announced that she will become the Senior Vice President for Strategic Initiatives for the National Health Council. And I just can't imagine the force that Eleanor is becoming. She already is a force, but in this new role, she is going to be at the lead with the National Health Council in defining the new directions we'll talk about. Immediately to my left is Teresa Mullins. Teresa sits in a position, the Office of Strategic Programs, she leads at the FDA. This office oversees all of the new relationships with patient organizations. It has overseen the patient-focused drug development effort that I'll ask her to describe. And she is going to be the leader, as she has been in the past, but in the future, of the negotiations for the FDA with Congress for the PDUFA, the user fee, I can't, prescription drug user fee. Good grief. As it comes up now for what we'll call PDUFA 6, an amazingly important policy position in Washington. And finally, my dear friend Sharon Terry, who is the head of the Genetic Alliance. Sharon and I have known each other for a very long time, got to work together as the Genetic Alliance, and Sharon became a force in creating the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act and getting it passed. She's been received many, many distinguished awards, serves on the IOM. She chaired the IOM committee on the CTSA reform. Her accolades and her distinguished contributions as an extraordinarily articulate advocate just really have no bounds. So let me sit down and join my panelists. And I think I'll just go in order from my left to the right. You're each scientists. How has your work as a scientist in the last several years been fundamentally changed by the new role that you perceive of the patients having? Or an administrator, if you want to not just say as a scientist, but how has your work, whatever you define it, and Eleanor, if you want to start, how has it changed because of what we're going to talk about today?
I think that's a great question. It has changed very significantly over the last couple of years because I think as scientists, researchers, we always began with what we were curious about. What did we want to know? What was the research question that was important to us? And we pursued the research from that angle. So whatever proposal you were preparing to NIH or any other sponsor, you began with the research question, and it was your own research question that you had developed with your colleagues. And when you think about patient-centeredness now and patient-centered outcomes research, it changes very fundamentally where you begin your thought process and how you begin to shape your research question. You don't shape your research question on your own anymore. You listen to patients, and they shape your research question with you, for you. They give you the information about what's important to them and what are the questions that are important to them. What do they want to know? And you listen to that voice in initiating your work now, and you don't just do it on your own in isolation.
So for me, as a this new term, citizen scientist, it's bringing us to a center that I have always felt but not had access to. And by that I mean, so my children were diagnosed in 1994 with a genetic disorder. It was rare, no one was working on it. I was a college chaplain, my husband was a fire protection engineer, and we catapulted ourselves into the scientific arena. We had to pretend for a lot of years that we were scientists, so we had to act like scientists, dress like scientists, speak like scientists. I have 140 peer-reviewed papers. I've discovered a gene, I patented the gene, I created a diagnostic test, I've done several clinical trials. All of that was fake. Because all the while I was really longing for us to be able to use the power of being people who had kids with a disease, and now 4,000 kids we've discovered around the world, and then since the last 11 or 12 years working with 1,000, 2,000 rare disease and common disease genetic organizations, we really wanted to go back to the center and say, we talk in this community, in the scientific community, a lot about them, about building bridges to them, about going over to them, and the them is us. So when we start to build this new we, our language needs to change, our sensibilities change, and I'm really excited to be able to sort of come back home to myself and be a mom, a person who doesn't have any scientific credentials, and have a significant role.
Hey, good morning. I'm Teresa Mullen, person you hadn't met before, and I am, as Debra says, I direct the office in the Center for Drugs, actually. And so, as you know, FDA reviews and approves and monitors the safety of drugs that are on the market. And we really, several years ago, noticed that we okay, well, you might say, well, you woke up and noticed not like that at all, but that if you look at the disease demographics and the kinds of disease that Americans are living with, more and more people are living with chronic disease. We still have problems, but to a large extent, we've been successful with developing drugs to treat infection or to treat things that used to kill people and had much shorter life expectancy for Americans and other people in the world. Now we're living in an era of chronic disease. Many people living for most of their lives with a disease and having to manage it. In many cases, the disease may be progressive. They may experience reduced functionality over time. They have symptoms they have to live with. And so in our job of doing benefit risk assessment for new drugs and continuing to evaluate benefit versus risk over the course of a drug, its life cycle, its time that's available to patients and on the market, we really didn't have a good way to get patients' input and hear the patient's perspective on what it's like to live with that disease and what it's like to use the treatments that are available, how good were those treatments, where were they falling short, and so what's been their experience with treatment. We have very narrow programs where a person could come in after extensive conflict of interest screening and be representing a whole population of patients. In some cases, the person may be very good at presenting a patient perspective, but not have the disease, in fact, that is of interest or of concern. And so we needed a way to expand collecting that kind of information, and that's what this patient-focused drug development program has been about. And we've had it underway since 2013. It was a commitment that we made to explore how to do this under the last reauthorization of the sort of mouthful that Debra was trying to tell you about before. It's called PDUFA. It sounds like a town somewhere in the United States, but in fact it's a user fee program, and it has to get reauthorized every 5 years, and we have extensive negotiation with the pharmaceutical industry, and we have extensive interaction and outreach with patient and public stakeholders throughout this process, and it's all we have a public meeting on Wednesday if you're in town and like to join us at White Oak. We have a public meeting to kick off this process, but this was one of the things that resulted from our last engagement with patients and other parties to say, hey, let's try to find some way to get the broader community of patients to give us a sense of what it's like to live with their disease. And so we committed to run at least 20 meetings, each focused on a different disease, not on a specific product, but on the disease. And that enabled us to reach out and try to get as many people as possible. Sharon's been helpful in some of these diseases, trying to help us engage and let the community know we're trying to do this. And it's produced some very powerful findings. And so that's really been the latest ramp up for at least the Center for Drugs. With that, I'll pass it back to Debra.
Thank you. And I just want to encourage everybody to be thinking of some questions, because at the last 15 or 10 minutes we'll take questions. And I want to come back, of course, to patient-focused drug development and really to the specifics of what you're learning. So hang on to that, because we're going to return definitely to what this means for the clinical trial design of the future. The clinical trials that people in this room will be designing. I'm going to come back and ask you, how do they think differently about those designs? But before I do that, I just want to make sure, as a level-setting question to you, are there myths that we need to identify and either destroy or validate about the new role of the patient and who this patient, who this participant is? And I tee that up about data access, data security. I'll put anything on Facebook, but don't take my health data. I'll also ask about the patient. Is everybody a Sharon Terry? And how do we think about patients? I often feel that health literacy it's very important, but is it sometimes held up as a roadblock? I'm not suggesting answers, but I want to get these myths out on the table. And Sharon, if you're going to allow me, I'd like to start with you and then have others contribute.
Great. This is a tremendously broad question. So I think that some of the myths are that we can't let the public, and as we all know, there's no such thing as the public, but we'll just use that phrase for a moment. We can't let them know that we don't know. And the we in this case is the provider medical delivery system. That if we do let them know that they'll lose faith in the medical system. And I think people are able to understand that we're iteratively moving toward things. The second sort of secret or myth that we haven't let people know is that they're part of the solution. That if, yes, we don't know the exact answer, which arthritis drug it might be for you, which SRI might be for you, SSRI, we could let people know that they could actually be participants in the process and we can get there faster. I think the other myth that we work with a lot is the idea that the public, again, this amorphous community, is one way or another. So either everyone wants to share everything. Look at kids on Facebook. I say look at kids on Facebook and how many of them have figured out ways to not have their parents see their Facebook profile or their job see their Facebook profile. So some people want to share and some people don't. Are all people not wanting to share, like the privacy activists that we have seen destroy, for example, newborn screening blood spots in Texas and in other states? No, not everyone wants to be so private. It's probably, and we know it is, contextual, it's situational, it's lifespan, life course situation. When Debra was diagnosed and in such agony and pain, she was very willing to share information to get to the right treatment for her. At other times in our lives, we're not so interested in sharing. So I think the myth that one size will fit all for all of these interactions is one that we need to obliterate.
So either Teresa or Eleanor. Teresa?
I guess I can follow up with some of the things that are, and it would be sort of along the same lines. I think we haven't figured out what all these opportunities are. Debra talked a lot of exciting opportunities, but I think that they're not all well formed yet. I think that we are going to still be undertaking how to effectively and respectfully also include a patient community and get their support. Some communities we found in our work people are so, their lives are so taken up with dealing with their disease that we have to figure out how to get their input and not create further burden or stress in their life. So I think we're still trying to figure out how to do this. FDA does have, for example, patient-reported outcome guidance out there we put out in 2009, but again, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation, and we are looking now at how to create ways that are pragmatic and methodologically sound, but accessible and ready to go, fit for purpose, to make that easier for including the patient's perspective. We have a whole science of patient input that's still in the early stages yet, so it's not a done deal and you've missed out on that. I mean, this is something that we're very much beginning, trying to figure out how to do it, and do it in a way that keeps things moving forward and keeps the momentum up on that work.
My colleagues have already mentioned a number of things that came to mind, Debra, when you asked your question, but one thing that I think would be of interest to this audience is, from the perspective of a clinician, the myth that I can think of is that a clinician believes, and this is again not universal, but just in general, a clinician believes that if I can only get my patient to understand what they need to do, they'll listen to me and they'll do it. And then we can improve their adherence because I just need to get them to understand and I can get them to adhere. And I think the myth of that is that they most likely do understand, but they're making other choices. And our role as clinicians is to be now a little bit more open about the discussion with them. What goals do they want to achieve? What aspirations do they have? What are the kinds of things that I can do to help them achieve adherence if that's the direction they want to go? And having that conversation, and it's a little bit more of how can we have the conversation about the direction and the aspirations that you have and what I can do to get you there, and less about how do I get you to do what I think you need to do.
I'd like to turn now to the emerging fields of new data sources and new methodology, research methods. And you started to go down this road, Teresa. But maybe I'll ask you to come in last. And I would like, Sharon, for you to talk about some of the really, I think, groundbreaking research tools, methods, and platforms that you're working on. And then I'm going to ask Eleanor to talk about similarly big data access platforms that are all dependent on a new, incredibly different level of patient level data. So let me turn it over to Sharon.
Great, thanks. So I think we're all enamored by big data and begin to think about the power of it. We've seen what it can do in lots of other industries. We've seen, our whole lives transformed essentially. If someone told us 10 years ago you could buy any book you want anywhere in the world, you would have said that's crazy. Or that you can order something right here, right now, sitting here during the panel, and it will be on your doorstep by tomorrow morning. The same thing can happen in medicine and in health, but I think there are some considerations, obviously, that need to be made. And some of the work that I've been doing lately is creating a platform that we call Platform for Engaging Everyone Responsibly. And it takes the kind of dynamic and granular contextual stuff that I talked about just previously and allows it to be part of the system. So in other words, individuals get to decide what data they will share with whom and when. At first, when I mention this, people say, well, you're skewing the data. I would put forth that if we only have about 3-4% of people involved in clinical trials in the United States, the data is pretty skewed. So if we can move that to 8% or 16%, it will be remarkable. And further, what we've seen in this platform with about 10,000 people having signed up through the patient-focused drug development project we did and other places that we're working, about 85% share, about 10% say maybe, our system allows maybe, and about 5% say not now. Later they can come back. So I think what we're seeing in this new world of data, new technologies that will allow granular and dynamic engagement and not just the transaction of consent, is an opportunity to really move people along. And the last thing I'll add is we're seeing this on a big scale. I'm part of something called PCORnet, which is part of PCORI, which is the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. This is a place where 18 patient-powered research networks, so the things that we invented, as Debra showed, March of Dimes and my own foundation, 20 years old, years ago, but have finally been recognized by the system to work together to do this kind of data movement that I think will help things like the new Precision Medicine Initiative and others.
So I think the kinds of things that Sharon is talking about are the kinds of things that we're seeing more and more of, where patients are more involved and patients are at the center. So you're getting, as part of the database, patient-reported outcomes, genetic data, things that we really haven't had very good access to in the past. We're all pretty familiar with the very large databases that are out there that are really claims-oriented, billing transaction-oriented. When you talk about big data, we have some very large data sets now. I'm working with Optum Labs. I have access to 150 million lives in claims data, 50 million lives in electronic medical records data. It's a fabulous, fabulous resource, but it's very, very narrow in terms of what's in there, and it's not very patient-centered. It's very transaction-oriented. And so the effort in the future, and I know it's something that we're working on, and I know it's something that the Optum's folks are working on, how do we get those kinds of databases that have a lot of very valuable information in them, but how do we get that married with the kinds of things that other organizations are working on that get at that patient-reported outcome data, get at the genomic data, and shape patient-centered questions so that we can get the most out of the data resources that we have. It's incremental, it's growing, it's going to only get better from here, and we have to just get through the hurdles of consent and those kinds of things, which really are achievable. We can do that, and it's very futuristic. The databases that we have today will be extremely different 10 years from now because of the trajectory that we're on.
That's really, really helpful to be seeing around the corner. And before I ask Teresa, or maybe Teresa, you'd like to speak to this, are you seeing the new terms, the new words that we want to play with are adaptive algorithms, computable phenotypes? Will the audience be able, do you see a future where these databases begin to give us predictors in advance of the patient who may be at risk. We're looking at trying to do this in Alzheimer's. If you get enough data in the Optum Labs database and enough data self-reported through something like the Brain Health Registry, if people wear wearable apps and they start to change in the way that they interface with information, will there be signals there of people at risk that we can't pick up today?
Well, I'm a social scientist, so I'm not a scientist that's going to speak very much to what you're asking, but I think that what you're describing sounds to me more on the order of looking for biomarkers and things that may have predictive value, and so that patient surely will be involved because you'll have to take a sample or you'll have to collect information from them, but whether they're having to say anything or report it out of their mouth, I don't know. So I think that certainly you always need data to be able to advance science. And so the things that the patient may be the source of that data because they're the source of the information about disease, including biomarkers, I would certainly see the need for data there. But I think that the way that Eleanor has described, and I think very nicely kind of characterized the strength and maybe the limitation of the data we have today. The data we have today is a reflection of current and past practices of care, and so we've just been saying how those have really not been putting the patient as quite where we want them, not at the center, and so their data that they generate are not going to be reflective of that perspective. And I think we would agree that as the system moves forward and as we begin to bring in more explicit attention to the patient as a really critical data source, and I mean reporting, the patient reporting on their experience and describing their experience as a data source we haven't really capitalized on before. They hadn't been viewed as a technical expert on what it's like to live with their disease. I think people have known that, but not stopped and said, wait a minute, that's a critical perspective. And so one of the things we're looking at now, and it's very nascent, we're not well along here, is the development of sets of impact measures. Impact, first of all, types of impact. Impact of disease on the patient, impact of treatment. Whether it be adverse experiences or even burden of following the therapy. So all these kinds of things, we can identify them. The next step would be moving them to a measurable scale that's meaningful to the patients. And reliable in terms of patient measurement and reporting, and not burdensome so that it's such a hassle and it's so much reporting that people just are not going to do that because they have to live their lives. So I think to us that's the sweet spot, and if we can move some of these things that we're talking about to instrumentation and regular measurement, I think that would create tremendous power, and then we'd have something we could begin to collect, and if we could standardize it, for example, by disease, or maybe by symptom, but we have to look at what's the appropriate way to standardize. If we were able to standardize it, then we would be able to, in fact, analyze that data across therapies, across settings, and so on. And so I think that, to me, we're a little early on in terms of the instrumentation and measurement that would create some of this power that I think Eleanor is referring to.
Exactly.
Yeah, do you want to share?
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the things, I'm sure that many of the researchers that are here in the audience are thinking, well, we've been collecting patient-reported outcomes, we've been designing pro tools for the last 20 years, and that's true. But I think if you actually think about the origin of a lot of those tools that we've been using, they never originated from the patient. They originated from getting clinicians together in a room and saying, what kind of questions do you ask your patients? What kind of information do you get from your patients? And that's where those item banks originated from. Not 100% of the time, but a large portion of the time. And so we now have some tools that maybe in many cases we're disappointed with. They're not performing the way we wanted them to perform or the way that we thought that they would perform. And we need to step back a little bit from that and have the questions and the items originate with the patient. What did they think was important to their lives? Shape items around that rather than shaping items around what a clinician thinks is important. And all of that feeds into creating a more universal, standardized tool if we can get there, and incorporating that into the caregiving situations that we might find patients in.
Sharon?
Yeah, These are really wonderful advances. They're music to my ears, and it struck me lately that it's sort of like if we had all been in the designing cars business and someone asked us, you know, this car that you just produced, who gave input into this? And we said, we let one person sit in it once. We didn't let them drive it, and we didn't ask them anything else about it, but we did let a person sit in it. And the remarkable thing to me is that this has been so slow in medicine and health, and I completely get why. You know, it's been a highly regulated field. It's come out of academia in a way that lots of other industries haven't. It has had the whole capital markets of pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, interested, and it doesn't come back to the people so easily. And I even think about people like yourselves and how integral you have to be to the consumer, patient, participant piece, because you are the place where the consumer meets the drug, so to speak. And we see real opportunity in this new way of thinking, new way of having participants and all of us be part of the process as a real opportunity for the kinds of interfaces that I think will be the pharmacy of the future, the participants' interaction of the future, and the clinical interaction of the future.
I really think this is such a sweet spot in this conversation that I don't want to cut it off if there are more ideas, because I feel that the people in the audience are the people who are going to design the new instruments, are going to be thinking about the new way that you have this one-on-one relationship with the patient. Julie Gerberding, who was head of the CDC, now on the executive committee at Merck, at the CDC, she developed a relationship with Walmart because in her view, and this was 8 years ago, more public health was happening at Walmart than maybe in some of our at NACHO and ASTHO and through our regulated public health system. And she wanted to recognize that there were two complementary systems of public health starting to emerge. And when the patient-centered medical home first came out, she said to me, the patient-centered medical home is with the patient, and they're going to find it at their pharmacies. She said, people are just asleep, not understanding that this is a place where the mother who works can get her child vaccinated. It's where the senior can go. It's a place of a trusting relationship. So I don't want to back away from the role of the pharmacy community and the pharmaceutical scientists in developing these new tools. And if anybody can take it from there, both Teresa and Eleanor, please.
Yeah, I want to add to that, because I think it's twofold. It's you know, in this audience of the academia and the you know, producing the new pharmacists and continuing education for existing pharmacists, I think that from this perspective, this new world means that there's a new approach and new information that clinicians are going to need. They're going to need to be able to interpret these new data that come out of these new studies and figure out how they apply it in clinical practice, how do they apply it in clinical decision making, giving them the skill and the tools to interpret that new literature that comes out, these new science studies that come out with new data sources that maybe when they were in school 10, 15 years ago, or even longer when I was in school, that we weren't taught those things. We were taught randomized controlled trials and how to interpret the safety and efficacy data that comes out of those kinds of studies. More recently, people have learned how to evaluate more critically cost-effectiveness types of studies, because that's become a newer technique in the last 20 years that clinicians needed to learn how to evaluate. But we're going to have newer kinds of data coming out, newer kinds of designs, and the clinicians of the future really need to be able to look at this information, critically evaluate it, try to figure out how they will use it, and incorporate it into their practice and into their decision making. And it's going to be a little bit new and different for them.
So I would add to that I think one of the value of the standardization we've been talking about, that probably pharmacists and are like reviewers at FDA, in that you have a lot of things to be doing at one time and covering, and you really have maybe limited time to even do the kind of in-depth analysis that Eleanor is describing. And so one of the things that we think would be beneficial, we're not there yet, so this is part of the vision, is that we try to get these tools and measurement sets determined, if possible, as before you go into clinical trials, so that those measurement tools are used in the clinical trials, that they're used in the studies, that perhaps they are able to produce evidence that can be part of the evidence that's used to determine whether or not the drug can be marketed. They can inform benefit and risk in a very rich way. And in fact, that the same set of measures might be used within a disease area, so that from one drug to the next to treat the same disease, the patient's set of endpoints is the same, and so that a reviewer can compare, and as their different drugs are being reviewed for the same disease, they can look at the performance of one versus another. That information about how well the drug performs from the perspective of the patient can also go into labeling potentially, and that would be very helpful when you are talking to the patient or the physician's talking to the patient and you're trying to look at what therapy would be best for that patient. You'll have that information there readily at hand, and it'll be comparable from one drug to the next. I mean, that's part of our vision of where we'd like to see it go, to make it easier, provide that in-depth information, but then you might really do the in-depth understanding of that instrument one time, and then when you start to see it show up in information for different drugs, you'll know what's behind it. So that's also part of what I think we'd ultimately like to get to.
Sharon?
Yeah, I'd also like to add sort of the other direction, because, for example, at PCORNet, one of the things we're working on right now is allowing the 18 PPRN, patient-powered research networks, to actually get the word out about the 100 conditions that we cover through pharmacies. So we're working right now with CVS to allow information to be in the Minute Clinic so that individuals can interact with these research registries essentially around the conditions that they're picking up their prescription for. And I think we could broaden that out pretty easily, especially in platforms like the one I have has 10,000 diseases and its subtypes. So there's something for everyone. And the information that could be delivered back to the system broadly from the pharmacy experience on tablets or kiosks could be quite facile and easy. Because I think ultimately, Debra, in your question was inherent the idea that we've got to make this more frictionless for people, that it has to happen where we live. If it's hard for us to find the tear-off for a clinical trial at a bus stop and then go 50 miles to an academic medical center to participate, we're not going to do it. That's why we have such low numbers in part. And I think instead, if we have the places where we live, where we work, where we are most encountering our neighbors, be the place where we can be involved in clinical trials, our community will support it, our family will support it. It will become second nature for all of us to be part of that answer.
I'm going to ask anybody with a question to come up to the mic, but if you would, and I hope you have some, because I would love to be just in your minds, in your shoes. But I want to ask another question. Sharon, you just triggered a thought when I said, of course, we have the tools to bring the trial to the patient, and those tools are going to be technology-based in large part. Are we creating a new era of health disparities where the people with access to technology are going to be the elevated group of the clinical trial of the 21st century, mid-century?
Yeah, and I think that is a major, major concern for me, both in the technologies that we're advancing and also in new fields like genetics, for example. If we're going to start to screen everybody and hand out exomes, that's great because it's wonderful phenotypic, genotypic information, but it's going to create disparities. So I think what we need to do is follow other kinds of technologies into homes in a way that makes it much easier. So for example, my system right now is either computer or smartphone based. Bad. Needs to be text-based. We know in America, Robert Wood Johnson and others in surveys have shown that the ubiquitousness of a texting phone is amazing and is everywhere. So we need to get things to a level where you're just asking me 3 or 4 questions. I can respond with a text message. I can do it over a series of days. I can do it when I'm taking the prescription at home or when I'm not. I can answer a question that pops up. That needs to be much easier for me to do. The other thing I think we need to do is we cannot forget the human touch. And there are ways we can do that, make things both high-tech and high-touch, that we forget. So we need to go to people's churches and temples. We need to go to the daycare centers. We need to go to the community centers and be in those centers. And we look at that and say, oh my gosh, that's far too expensive, way too difficult. But if Amazon can drop a package on every one of our doorsteps this afternoon, we can do this in health as well. We need to get over being afraid of the technologies on the delivery end, but we also need not to forget we need to touch people on the service end.
And I'm going to start with you on the right in just a minute, but one of the new areas is looking at an electronic informed consent, and how are we going to know that the person who's consented is the person, and looking at, again, smartphone technology, a selfie, a fingerprint, something that identifies a person in a new age, and this is really in front of us today. If I could, you were first to the mic, and if you'd introduce yourself, your name, and then we'll go back and forth.
Great, thanks. Daniel Mullins from University of Maryland. I have a two-part question. For Teresa, for those of us who aren't as comfortable reading regulatory language, what is the most significant piece of what came out of committee in terms of 21st century cures that might be overlooked or misunderstood by people who don't read regulatory language on a regular basis? And for the rest of the panel, what should we be looking for in terms of what might change as we go from where we are today to actual implementation?
Thank you, Dan. I'm afraid that you flatter me. This is a fairly large piece of legislation, and it was just passed last week, and and I spent doing something else this weekend. I mean, but there.
How dare you?
Oh, I know what you're thinking. But let's just focus on section 2001, which is the patient experience data, or at least it was. Maybe it got changed.
It might have gotten changed.
There's a patient experience data section. And I think that it's very helpful. It's not very prescriptive. It leaves open, and I'm sure it anticipates the fact that we're going to be running this process, engaging people in the coming months to shape up more specifically what we will do. But it does refer to FDA developing better understanding and methods for collecting information, what's called patient experience data. And I think that's a good term because it doesn't just narrow it down to patient-reported outcomes, which might only be about a therapy. It really does get to the broader set of things we've been talking about up here. And of course, we'll stick to the ones that would be relevant to FDA decision-making. But I think that it allows us to take that broader look. It directs us to look at methods and figure out methods for measurement, determine how we would be using this information in submissions that might come to FDA for review. Again, there are many types of submissions, and some of them can be done in the development phase, so that's very useful too, to keep it open, because there's a number of types we might need to do. I think it directs us to do workshops, which is also a very important aspect to how we're going to be figuring out where to go. Collecting public input, getting the benefit of everyone's thinking on this. And finally, we'll produce guidance document to industry, at least one, probably multiple guidance. And actually, these guidances will probably be to the public, because we have heard a number of organizations say they want to form public-private partnerships. So you'll maybe see pre-competitively focused partnerships with patient advocacy groups, academic experts, industry sponsors, all working together, and maybe in a disease area, which would be great, so that the guidance would be useful to them as well. So that piece is good. There's an awful lot in there, and we're going to wait to see what gets signed finally, and we'll follow along and provide whatever technical assistance we can in the meantime.
And Teresa, you didn't read the part where it says it quadruples your staff and your budget?
That was the part that must have been referred to.
You missed that part, didn't you?
No, there was some funding in there for FDA, but it was mostly support, much needed for NIH.
Good morning, I'm Joan Lukoski, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Science Officer for the AACP. So I'm delighted that you're here and sharing your visionary focus for the future of research in our country. So a question I have for all of you on the table, because you've thought about these issues, what kind of workforce do you see us needing for the future? And I'm someone who wants 8th graders to have an app so they can be part of doing clinical research at home. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the workforce.
Sharon? and
Thank you,
Ellen.
that's fabulous.
great
I-
question.
I'm fond of saying I want smart Girl Scouts working on our stuff. So same concept. So the workforce of the future, I think, and I hope, is going to be one that's pretty virtual in the sense of being able to be connected around the nation, that the whatever 86% of community hospitals, community docs, community pharmacists can be part of the equation, because I think as long as we leave it in the ivory towers or in the 61 CTSAs, we're not going to get the kind of connections that we need. I think we're also going to start to see some hybrids. So some good crossovers between engineering. I chair an IOM roundtable, and in fact, I'm late for the IOM board meeting today where the National Academies of Medicine is being announced. And what we're starting to look at is how do we cross over to the National Academies of Science and the engineering and other departments. So I think we're going to see some hybrid crossovers between medicine and other disciplines, and I really hope we're going to integrate social science more, so Teresa will probably like to hear this, but I think we really need anthropologists, sociologists working with us, because in medicine and health, I think we keep reinventing wheels we don't need to reinvent because other disciplines have incorporated the social science. So I think it will look not as specialized in the same silos as we have today, but broader and more connected.
I want to add to that because I think we're looking at a future of more interdisciplinary research and more interdisciplinary practice. And so I think one of the things that's going to be very foundational in all of that is going to be communication skills. And so we've always emphasized communication skills in pharmacy programs. I think even more so now because it's communication not just with patients and their families, but also communications with other professions like sociology, anthropology, to be able to really be truly patient-focused and patient-centered. And also recognizing that there are going to be times when you're dealing with disciplines that are not used to having that face-to-face contact with patients. And so when you're talking to bench scientists and they now also have to become more patient-centered in the work that they do, NIH is recognizing that this is a very important theme that needs to run through all of the research that they support. And you've got bench scientists saying, wait a minute, I do work on mice. What am I supposed to be doing with patients? There's going to have to be an interdisciplinary effort to help bring those bench scientists the information that they need from patients.
Thank you. I think we have two more questions, and then we'll have to draw it to a conclusion.
Thank you so much. My name is Eric Boyce. I'm from the University of the Pacific in California. Sorry if this is coming across fuzzy. Fascinating talk. I really appreciate it. One of the things that concerns us, obviously, is data in and data out. And so what are your perceptions now with regard to the willingness of patients, the public, to provide information, their knowledge in providing the information, and their willingness to provide accurate information? Because that's really going to drive a lot of these decisions that then can be made from the data that are collected. Thank you so much.
I think that one's yours.
Yeah, I probably Teresa has something to say about this as well. So I think that's a great question, and I completely agree with Teresa that we're early in trying to understand how to incorporate this. On the other side, though, again, if we come from the people, us, all of us, if someone said to you, your experience has not been validated around your liking your new bicycle, you would say, but it's my experience, and so it doesn't need validation. To a certain extent, that's true, and on the other side, there's a science that we need to respect. So I think what we're going to see is if we do the experience piece more, the perspectives, the perceptions piece more, and we start to apply scientific principles, we'll get more rigorous. And at the same time, we don't want to lose the richness of those experiences and have to figure out new science, I think, that will allow that to be integrated. I think the other thing we're seeing is that in work like I'm doing where we're collecting patient-reported outcomes and then validating it against electronic health records and against other measures, there's a great deal of concordance. People don't necessarily want to lie. Sometimes they don't know how to express whatever it is. And then the devices that Debra talked about are more and more integrated, and those, of course, are giving back real-time data. There's equally difficult things using claims data or using electronic health records in terms of whether that data in is not good data or dirty data as well. So I think as we start to do this cycle, we're going to see better and better data. The other example I like to give is, of course, something like Wikipedia, which 10 years ago, if a child went went into his teacher with a Wikipedia entry, the teacher told him to go away, that was not good data. And now often that's where we start because so many people have cleaned that data, so to speak, by enormous and intense crowdsourcing. So I think we're going to have a period of noise and we're going to come to some kind of resolution.
Yeah, I'm also concerned about the over-reporting of one end of the spectrum or the other.
I mean, well, I think I can't necessarily comment on that, but what I would add to what, I mean, I think it also says that we have a ways to go in terms of making this a reliable, good source. But on the other side of it, we have focused so far in this patient-focused effort on chronic diseases. And I think that what we have found in every case, and this is consistent with findings in a fairly recent Pew study, which is that people with the chronic diseases who have come to talk to us about their condition are very motivated to help. I mean, they have a huge stake in it. They're very willing to do whatever they can. You tell them how they have to fit it into their life and make it, has to be convenient enough, but they tend to be more engaged and using social media, internet. They rely on those resources and seek them a lot more. And they tell us, and I think that we would think that this is something we should work with to see how can they participate and continue to be a partner. So it may be that, in particular, people who have a disease that they're going to be living with probably for the rest of their lives, they're even more motivated to try to work with this. So we may see that as well.
I think also, too, it's this issue of whose question it is. So if someone's filling out a survey or they're answering questions and they feel like they're your questions, not my questions, then they're going to have more of a tendency to not really care about the answers. But when it's something that originated with them that they really care about because it's a disease or their own condition that they really care about, there's going to be more of a tendency to be more motivated and to be more accurate.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marie Chisholm-Burns from the University of Tennessee. First of all, thanks for a great presentation. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts and where we're going with this. And you talked about some tremendous opportunities that can be used from this side of the spectrum to the total side of the spectrum where it really counts, and that's with our patients. My question comes from one of two examples that you use. I heard you speak about Amazon. I think about Facebook. And those companies, what they represent is quickness, so acceleration, widespread in access. And so I'm wanting to hear your thoughts about the acceleration of these things that you talked about, because doing things in real time, when it happens and well, let's be honest, academia, not so fast. Government, not so fast. So if you could just speak about the acceleration and your thoughts about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll say something about that. I think that the other heartening thing to me is that we, patients, participants, consumers, are finally having a role because we will iterate on things quickly. You know, our people are suffering, they need solutions. The other thing we see in those other industries like Amazon or Facebook is a lean startup mentality, right? So they want to fail early and fail often. That is not the mantra of the FDA, for example. Neither is it.
Or a drug company.
Or a drug company,
yeah.
or academic institutions. And so I feel like we have a very, very heavy lift because we are so enmeshed with each other in this world. But I do think there are very heartening signs that we are moving in that direction. I just came last week, Wednesday, the White House recognized champions of change in precision medicine, and that's the initiative that Obama announced and that FDA, NIH, and others are working on, OSTP. And what we heard there as participants in that session really were lots of really cool, flip the clinic. The idea that if we go to a store, they say, do you want your receipt? And if we don't give it to you, we're going to give you X. Can we start to say, do you want your electronic health record? And if we don't give it to you, this visit's free. So the force of consumers, I think, will start to change those things. At the same time, I know we have to be careful, but I'm looking forward to these places where we can fail and we can be public about our failures.
And I think the whole notion of data sharing, the patient's negotiation in this new transaction about expanding the pre-competitive playing field is really going to be one of the things that will accelerate and we'll see in the next 3 years. I think the patient voice and insisting on pre-competitive data sharing is going to be a major shift going into PDUFA 6. Thank you to the panel, and thank you, each of you, for your good participation today. It's been a pleasure.